In 1819, a fair-haired teenage girl became ruler of the most powerful empire on Earth. By the time she died, 1 in 4 humans lived under her rule. Her family controlled most of Europe's thrones, and the world had been completely transformed. Here's what life was really like during the Victorian era. So yeah, if these stories help you sleep, subscribe. And I'm curious, what time is it where you are? Comment your location and time. I saw someone from Tokyo last week saying it was already tomorrow there. Still trying to wrap my head around that. Okay, tonight it's the Victorian era. But wait, are you comfortable? No, really. Check. Pillows, blankets, the whole deal. Where we're going, you'll want to be settled. Your eyes flutter open to darkness. The heavy damask curtains around your bed block out almost all light. For a moment, you're disoriented. Is it morning already? You can hear the faint sounds of servants moving somewhere in the massive palace, their footsteps muffled by thick carpets. The air is cold against your face, but beneath the layers of blankets, you're warm enough. This is Kensington Palace, and the year is 1819. You're not Queen Victoria, not yet. Right now, you're just a little princess named Alexandrina Victoria, though everyone calls you Drina, and your life, frankly, sucks. I mean, sure, you live in a palace, but it's a damp, drafty old place that smells of mildew and coal smoke. Your bedroom isn't even your own. Your mother makes you sleep in her room, in a little bed next to hers. You're not allowed to walk downstairs without holding someone's hand. At 5 years old, that might make sense, but this rule will continue until you're literally an adult. "Good morning, princess," says your German governess, Baroness Letzen, the only person who seems to genuinely care about you. Your mother is still asleep, her loud German snoring filling the room. Unlike your comfy, temperature-controlled bedroom back in the real world, this royal bedroom is bizarrely uncomfortable. The fireplace has gone out overnight, and you can see your breath in the cold morning air. Your mother doesn't believe in heating rooms too much. She thinks it's unhealthy. The windows, sealed against the London fog, trap the smells of the previous day inside. Notes of perfume, body odour, because even royals didn't bathe daily. Coal smoke and the lingering scent of last night's dinner create a distinct aroma that modern noses would find overwhelming. Your feet hit the cold floor, and you wince. Even princesses don't have heated bathroom tiles in 1820. Actually, you don't have a bathroom at all. Instead, there's a ceramic chamber pot behind a screen in the corner of the room, which some poor servant will have to empty later. When you need a bath, which is only about once a week, servants will carry buckets of heated water up several flights of stairs to fill a portable metal tub. "Your lessons begin in 1 hour, princess," the Baroness reminds you. And oh God, the lessons. You're going to spend almost every waking hour studying languages, history, mathematics, religion, music, art. A relentless schedule designed by your mother and her trusted advisor, Sir John Conroy. They call it the Kensington system, but it's basically royal child prison. "Mother says I must practice my piano for 2 hours today," you say, your voice small. "And your Latin," adds the Baroness, "and your German, French and Italian." This wasn't just some weird royal quirk. Victoria actually learned to speak 5 languages: English, French, German, Italian and Latin. I spent 3 years trying to learn Spanish on a language app and still can't order a taco properly. Here's the thing about Victoria's childhood that most people don't realise. It was incredibly lonely. She had almost no friends her own age. She wasn't allowed to play with other children except her half-sister Theodora, who was much older. Her only real companion was her spaniel, Dash. "Can I play with Dash in the gardens today?" you ask hopefully. The Baroness smiles sadly. "Perhaps for a short while, if Sir John approves the weather is suitable." That's another fun thing about being Princess Victoria. You're never allowed outside alone. Every breath of fresh air must be approved and supervised. Your mother and Conroy are terrified you might catch a cold and die before becoming queen, or worse, that someone might kidnap you or influence you to think for yourself. You see, there's something you don't know yet, but the adults around you are very aware of. You're much closer to the throne than anyone expected. Your father, Edward, Duke of Kent, was only the fourth son of King George III, but a weird series of royal deaths and a shocking lack of legitimate children has pushed you up the line of succession. Sir John says I must practice my posture today. You sigh, straightening your back automatically. Conroy, a former military officer with no actual education experience, has appointed himself in charge of making you a proper queen. Mostly this involves making you miserable. Let me paint you a picture of Sir John Conroy, because this dude was the absolute worst. Imagine a tall, imposing man with perfect posture and cold, calculating eyes. He's handsome in that stern Victorian way, always dressed impeccably, with mutton chop sideburns and an air of absolute authority. Behind closed doors, historians suspect he was having an affair with Victoria's mother. Whatever the relationship, they were definitely in cahoots to control the future queen. The childhood home of one of history's most powerful monarchs wasn't the fairy tale you might imagine. Kensington Palace in the 1820s was actually kind of a dump by royal standards. It was drafty, with peeling wallpaper and furniture that had seen better days. King George IV, Victoria's uncle, deliberately kept it that way because he disliked her mother. Victoria later wrote that the palace had gloomy rooms with their old-fashioned furniture and small dark passages. The walls of Kensington were literally closing in on young Victoria. Her entire world consisted of a few rooms where she was constantly watched. Even her dolls were educational tools. She had to sew their clothes herself as part of her domestic training. She wasn't allowed to read novels or attend the theatre. Her meals were plain and strictly scheduled. Every minute of her day was planned by others. Time for breakfast, the Baroness says, helping you dress in a simple white cotton dress with a pinafore. No fancy princess gowns for daily wear. Victoria's mother insisted on simple, practical clothing. Breakfast in the royal household is disappointingly basic. A small portion of porridge, some bread with butter, and weak tea with milk. Victoria's mother believed in a simple diet for children. No sugary cereals or chocolate-filled croissants here. The bread is dense and chewy, nothing like the soft sandwich bread you're used to. I've had a letter from your cousin, Princess Sophia, the Baroness mentions as you eat. She sends her regards. Cousins. You have so many cousins, all part of the vast network of European royalty. Most of them you've never met. Your mother keeps you isolated from the court, from your father's family, from anyone who might challenge her control. It's all part of the plan. Keep you dependent on her and Conroy, so when you become queen, they'll be the ones actually ruling. Hold up. Let me paint you a picture of European royalty at this time. Imagine the most dramatic, backstabbing, incestuous family reunion possible, but everyone's wearing crowns. Victoria's grandfather, George III, yes, the one who lost America, had 15 children. These royal kids and their offspring were married into every major European royal house, creating a tangled web of cousins ruling different countries. Victoria herself would later marry her first cousin, Albert. This wasn't considered weird, it was strategic family business. The king is very ill, you overhear your mother whispering to Conroy later that morning. William may not last the year. King William IV, your uncle, the current King of England. If he dies, you're next. You're 17 now, almost 18. If the king dies after your 18th birthday, you can rule alone. If he dies before, your mother becomes regent, ruling in your name. This is the countdown that dominates your adolescence. Your mother and Conroy desperately want the king to die before your birthday. You desperately need him to hang on just a little longer. "I must speak with the princess about her duties," Conroy announces, striding into the room without knocking. "She must sign the papers." The papers. God, the papers. Conroy has been pushing you for months to sign documents that would make him your private secretary and your mother your regent. Even if you're already 18 when you become queen, you've refused every time, even during that horrible incident at Ramsgate. I need to tell you about the Ramsgate incident because it shows just how strong Victoria really was. When Victoria was 16, she got extremely sick while staying at a seaside town called Ramsgate. We're talking high fever, delirium, the works. Conroy saw his opportunity and tried to force her to sign papers making him her private secretary. Even delirious with fever, she refused. This teenage girl, who'd been controlled and manipulated her entire life, somehow found the strength to stand up to her abusers when it mattered most. "I will not sign," you say firmly, your voice stronger than you feel. Conroy's face darkens with anger. "You are an ignorant, foolish child. You need guidance. You need me." "I need only what the law provides," you counter. "You've studied constitutional law. You know your rights as the future monarch." This showdown between Victoria and Conroy happened repeatedly in the year before she became queen. Despite being raised to be compliant and dependent, Victoria somehow developed an extraordinary iron will. She understood power and was determined to claim hers when the time came. May 24th, 1837, your 18th birthday. You're officially an adult. The king still lives, though reports say he's failing fast. Your mother gives you a journal as a birthday present, leather-bound, with a lock and key. This will become your refuge, the one place you can speak freely. Victoria would end up writing over 60 million words in her diaries throughout her life. That's more than 120 books worth of material. "I shall be glad to have my liberty at last," you write in your new journal that night, and then, less than a month later, it happens. June 20th, 1837. Dawn is just breaking over Kensington Palace. You're asleep in your little bed in your mother's room, the same bed you've slept in since childhood. There's an urgent knocking at the door. "The princess must come down immediately," a voice calls. You're awakened, confused. The Baroness helps you put on a robe over your nightgown. Your hair is loose around your shoulders. No time to dress properly. "You must go alone," the Baroness whispers, breaking protocol for the first time in your memory. You descend the stairs without anyone holding your hand. In the drawing room below, you find the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Lord Chamberlain waiting, both looking solemn in formal black clothes. "Your Majesty," they say, bowing deeply. And just like that, everything changes. King William IV died at 2:12 that morning. You are now Queen Victoria, ruler of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, future Empress of India, head of the most powerful nation on earth. You're 18 years old. "I will be good," you say quietly. It's not a promise to the men before you, but to yourself. After a childhood of being controlled, you've just become one of the most powerful people in the world. I want you to try to wrap your head around what happened next, because it's kind of mind-blowing. This sheltered teenager who had never been allowed to walk downstairs alone was suddenly in charge of a global superpower. Victoria had never shopped in a store, cooked a meal, or even been alone in a room with a man who wasn't a servant or relative. Now she was making decisions affecting millions of lives. Within hours, your entire life transforms. You're moved to Buckingham Palace. For the first time in your memory, you have your own bedroom. You banish Conroy from your presence. You keep your mother at a careful distance, giving her rooms far from your own. You summon the Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne, who will become your trusted advisor and friend. The contrast between your old life and new couldn't be more stark. Yesterday, you needed permission to walk in the garden. Today, armies march at your command. The Queen would like her breakfast served in her study, you inform a startled servant, and she would like to review the state papers there as well. You're setting the schedule now, making your own decisions, eating what you want, when you want, sleeping in your own room. But becoming queen doesn't solve everything overnight. You've been so isolated that you know almost nothing about normal life. You've never handled money. You don't know how ordinary people live. You've barely left Kensington Palace grounds. Lord Melbourne suggests a tour of the country. Your Majesty, says the Baroness, who has remained as your trusted companion. The people wish to see their new queen. And see you they do. When you undertake your first royal tour, crowds fill the streets in every town. They throw flowers before your carriage. They cheer until they're hoarse. After the excesses and scandals of your uncles, the people are enchanted by the idea of a young, innocent queen. They seem to like me. You marvel to Melbourne after one particularly enthusiastic welcome. They love you, ma'am, he replies. You represent hope and a fresh beginning. Wait, I need to talk about Lord Melbourne for a second. Picture the ideal father figure, mentor, friend, all rolled into one distinguished package. That was Melbourne to young Victoria. He was 58 to her 18, widowed, childless, and completely devoted to guiding this young queen. He taught her everything about politics, governance, and royal duties. He answered her endless questions without condescension. Victoria adored him, writing in her diary that he was so clever, so kind. Some historians think she might have had a crush on him, which would be totally understandable for a teenager suddenly spending hours every day with a charming, attentive older man who treated her with respect for the first time in her life. For nearly 4 years, Melbourne was Victoria's rock. He advised her through political crises and royal scandals, including one of the first major PR disasters of her reign, the Lady Flora affair. Oh man, the Lady Flora affair was messy. One of Victoria's mother's ladies-in-waiting, Lady Flora Hastings, started showing signs of what looked like pregnancy. Victoria, who despised anyone associated with her mother and Conroy, believed the rumours that Lady Flora was carrying Conroy's child. Victoria basically slut-shamed her publicly, forcing her to undergo a humiliating medical examination. Turns out Lady Flora wasn't pregnant. She had a massive tumour on her liver. She died soon after, and the public briefly turned on Victoria for her cruelty. It wasn't Victoria's finest moment, but it showed how deep her trauma and resentment ran. This poised young queen still carried the scars of her controlled childhood, but the defining relationship of Victoria's life was yet to begin. In October 1839, her cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, came to visit the English court. Now, Victoria had met Albert briefly 3 years earlier and found him pleasant but unexciting. This time was different. Albert, at 20, had grown into a strikingly handsome man, tall with dark curly hair and bright blue eyes. He was serious, intelligent, and shared Victoria's love of music and art. "He is so handsome," you write in your diary that night. "His eyes are so blue and beautiful. His mouth is lovely." Within 5 days of his arrival, you're completely smitten, but there's an interesting wrinkle in this royal romance. As queen, you can't be proposed to. You must do the proposing. On October 15th, 1839, you summon Albert to your private study. Your hands are trembling slightly, but your voice is steady. "I would like to ask you, Cousin Albert, if you would do me the honour of marrying me?" Albert's serious face breaks into a radiant smile. He accepts immediately, taking your hands in his. "We will be very happy together," he promises. For once, a promise about your future actually comes true. The wedding takes place on February 10th, 1840, at the Chapel Royal in St James's Palace. Unlike modern royal brides, you don't wear a tiara, just a simple wreath of orange blossoms in your hair. But you do start a tradition that continues to this day. You wear white. Before Victoria, royal brides wore heavily embroidered gowns in rich colours. Her choice of a simple white dress revolutionised wedding fashion forever. This is one of the rare royal marriages that's actually a love match. Albert is intelligent, principled, and genuinely devoted to you. He's also strikingly handsome, as contemporary accounts never fail to mention. "It was the happiest day of my life," you write in your journal that night. The wedding night itself is a revelation. Despite Victorian stereotypes, Victoria actually enjoyed sex with Albert tremendously. In private letters, she described the heavenly beauty of their intimate life together. She would later write to her eldest daughter that sexual fulfillment was one of the greatest joys of marriage and God's intention. Despite enjoying the physical aspects of marriage, Victoria was less enthusiastic about its consequences. Within weeks of the wedding, you're pregnant with your first child. "I am not at all fond of babies generally," you confide in your diary. "I think they are very disgusting when they are small." Despite this initial reluctance, Victoria and Albert would eventually have 9 children together, 9 pregnancies in 17 years. Victoria honestly hated being pregnant, calling it the shadow side of marriage. She suffered terrible morning sickness and complained about looking like a rabbit or a guinea pig when pregnant. After giving birth, she experienced what we now recognise as postpartum depression. But Albert is a devoted husband and father. Unlike most aristocratic men of the time, he's actively involved with his children. He plays with them, teaches them, and helps design their education. He romps with the children in a way that makes my heart swell. You write, "After watching Albert rolling on the floor with your oldest daughter Vicky." Together, you and Albert create a new ideal of royal family life. Domestic, moral, and outwardly perfect. You commission paintings showing your growing family in intimate, informal settings. The public, embracing the new middle-class values of home and family, adores these glimpses of royal domesticity. But while you're creating this picture-perfect royal family, the country you rule is changing at a pace never before seen in human history. Beyond the palace walls, Britain is transforming from a rural agricultural society into the world's first industrial superpower. Lord Melbourne says the population of Manchester has tripled in 20 years, you remark to Albert over breakfast one morning. He says the factories there run day and night. Albert, always intellectually curious, is fascinated by these changes. "We must see these industrial cities for ourselves," he says. "A monarch should understand how her people live." And so, in the autumn of 1843, you undertake a royal tour of the industrial north. What you see there will change your understanding of the country you rule. The train journey itself is a marvel, moving faster than any human in history had travelled before the railway age. Chugging along at 30 miles per hour, watching the countryside blur past the windows is both thrilling and slightly terrifying. But it's when you arrive in Manchester that the true shock comes. The city is almost unrecognisable as a human habitation. Hundreds of factory chimneys belch thick black smoke that blots out the sun. The buildings are stained black with soot. The air burns your lungs and makes your eyes water. I can scarcely believe this is part of my kingdom, you whisper to Albert as your carriage processes through streets lined with cheering crowds. Behind the crowds you glimpse narrow alleys where pale, thin children in ragged clothes watch silently. The contrast between your life of palace luxury and the harsh reality of industrial Britain is stark. While you sleep on fine linen sheets in vast royal bedrooms, factory workers in Manchester might share a single room with an entire family, sleeping on straw pallets on the floor. While you enjoy 7-course dinners served on gold plate, children as young as 5 or 6 work 14-hour days in thundering factories or crawl through dangerous mine shafts. This is the paradox at the heart of the Victorian age. Unprecedented progress and prosperity existing alongside desperate poverty and exploitation. It's a world changing faster than anyone can comprehend, where ancient ways of life are disappearing and new ones emerging overnight. And at the centre of it all sits a young woman who never expected to be queen, whose own childhood was a kind of gilded prison, now responsible for navigating her nation through the most rapid transformation in human history. We must do something, Albert says quietly that night. After you've returned to your hotel, the conditions in those factories, the children working the looms, what can be done? You ask. Lord Melbourne says interference in business would damage the economy. Albert shakes his head. There must be a middle path between unfettered capitalism and state control, regulations to protect the most vulnerable, particularly children. This conversation, or ones very like it, led to real reforms. Albert became a passionate advocate for improving working conditions, public health and education. Victoria, influenced by her husband, supported many of these causes. But the scale of the challenge was immense. Britain in the 1840s was a nation in the throes of massive transformation. The population was exploding, from about 16 million when Victoria came to the throne to nearly 40 million by the end of her reign. People were flooding from rural areas into rapidly growing cities that had no infrastructure to support them. Sanitation, housing, public health, all were overwhelmed. In 1842, a shocking report revealed the horrifying conditions in mines and factories. Children as young as 4 or 5 working in pitch-black coal mines, girls harnessed like animals to coal carts, crawling through tunnels on all fours, factory accidents that mangled workers' bodies with no compensation or safety regulations. Reading these reports in the comfort of Buckingham Palace, you feel a weight of responsibility settling on your shoulders. The gap between your life and your subjects seems unbridgeable. Sometimes I wish I could walk among them unrecognised, you confide to Albert one evening, and to truly understand how they live. Perhaps we cannot experience their lives, Albert replies, but we can work to improve them. In the early years of your reign, that improvement took many forms. The Mines Act of 1842 prohibited women and children under 10 from working underground. The Factory Act of 1844 limited children's working hours and required dangerous machinery to be fenced off. These were small steps, but important ones. Meanwhile, your family continues to grow. By 1846, you have 5 children, with 4 more to come. Despite your initial reluctance about motherhood, you develop deep bonds with your children, especially your eldest daughter Vicky and your second child, Bertie, the future King Edward VII. Family life at Windsor Castle or Balmoral in Scotland gives you respite from the cares of state. Albert has redesigned parts of both residences to create comfortable, almost middle-class family spaces within the grand royal palaces. You play with the children, sketch, play piano, and enjoy quiet domestic evenings that would have been recognisable to any well-off Victorian family. One of the family traditions Albert brings from his German homeland will transform British culture forever: the Christmas tree. In 1848, the Illustrated London News publishes an engraving showing your family gathered around a decorated tree at Windsor Castle. Within a decade, Christmas trees are a fixture in middle-class Victorian homes. The children were wild with delight, you write in your journal on Christmas Eve, 1850. Albert arranged everything himself, as he always does. The tree was lit by small wax tapers and decorated with small gifts and sweets. The children could hardly be contained when they were finally allowed to see it. This scene, the devoted family gathered around the tree, the carefully chosen gifts, the emphasis on children's joy, would define the Victorian invention of the modern Christmas. Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, published in 1843, had already begun to transform the holiday from a rowdy adult celebration to a child-centred family festival. Your royal example cemented these new traditions. But while you're creating picture-perfect Christmases within palace walls, the country faces a catastrophe that will test your leadership. In the autumn of 1845, reports begin to arrive of a strange disease affecting potato crops in Ireland. By 1846, it's clear that this is no ordinary crop failure, but a full-scale famine. The reports from Ireland are grave indeed, Lord John Russell, your new Prime Minister, informs you. The potato crop has failed completely in many counties. There are already reports of starvation. What follows is one of the darkest chapters in British history. The Great Hunger will kill around 1 million people in Ireland and force another million to emigrate. The government response is woefully inadequate, hampered by laissez-faire economic policies and anti-Irish prejudice. You personally donate $2,000 to famine relief, a substantial sum worth millions in today's money. You issue a Queen's letter to be read in every church calling for donations to help the Irish, but the scale of the disaster overwhelms these efforts. In later years, you'll be called the Famine Queen in Ireland, blamed for a catastrophe that was partly natural disaster, partly political failure. The truth, as always, is more complicated than the myths that grow up around it. As the 1840s draw to a close, Britain is a nation of stark contrasts. Unprecedented wealth exists alongside grinding poverty. Technological marvels like the telegraph and railway transform daily life, while ancient diseases like cholera still ravage crowded cities. The Crystal Palace is rising in Hyde Park to showcase the wonders of British industry at the Great Exhibition of 1851, while in the slums of London, children die of starvation and neglect. And at the centre of it all, a young queen and her beloved husband try to chart a path forward, to use their influence to shape a changing world. Victoria is no longer the isolated, controlled princess of Kensington Palace. She has found her voice, her power, and in Albert, a partner who shares her vision of what a modern monarchy should be. "We have much to be grateful for," Albert says one evening in 1850, as you sit by the fire in your private apartments at Windsor. Outside, the winter wind howls around the ancient castle, but inside all is warm and peaceful. Your older children are asleep upstairs, the baby dozing in a cradle nearby. "Sometimes I can scarcely believe how far I have come from those gloomy rooms at Kensington," you reply, taking his hand. "Little do you know that the greatest challenges and the greatest grief still lie ahead. Wake up. No, not in your comfortable bed, not with your temperature-controlled room and filtered air. You're waking up in a small windowless room in Manchester, 1848. Your eyes sting before they even open. The air is thick with coal smoke that seeps through the cracks in the walls. You're not alone. 5 other people are crammed into this 10 by 12 foot space, sleeping on straw pallets laid directly on the dirt floor. Get up, boy, mill whistles blown. A rough hand shakes your shoulder. It's your father, already dressed in the same clothes he wore yesterday and the day before that. Washing clothes is a luxury that happens maybe once a month. Welcome to the other side of Victorian Britain, far from the palace walls and royal Christmas trees. This is where the Industrial Revolution actually happens, in cramped, disease-ridden slums where the workers who power the British Empire barely survive. "I've got the cough again," your little sister wheezes from her pallet in the corner. She's 7, with spindly limbs and a hollow-cheeked face. In a wealthy family, she'd be protected, educated, cherished. Here she'll start working in the cotton mill next year. Her small fingers perfect for tying broken threads in the thundering machines. Let me paint a picture of a Victorian industrial city for you. Imagine hundreds of factory chimneys belching black smoke so thick it blocks out the sun, streets running with open sewage and factory waste, buildings packed so tightly together that entire neighbourhoods never see direct sunlight. The air doesn't just smell bad, it burns your lungs and coats your throat with grit. Your snot comes out black at the end of the day. Your eyes constantly water. Your skin is never truly clean. No time for breakfast, your father says. We're late. Late means docked wages, or even losing your job. And losing your job in Victorian England might actually kill you because there's no safety net, no unemployment insurance, no food stamps, just the workhouse, the last stop before starvation. You pull on your clothes, the same ones you've worn all week, and follow your father into the narrow street. It's barely dawn, but the city is already alive with the sounds of thousands of workers heading to factories. The cobblestones are slick with some unidentifiable muck. You try not to think about what it might be. Something dead, probably. The smell suggests as much. The overseer says I might move up to the spinning floor next month, your father says, his breath visible in the cold morning air. 2 more shillings a week. 2 more shillings. The difference between meat once a week or twice. The difference between candles for light or darkness. These tiny gradations of poverty define working class life. In the 1840s, Manchester's population exploded from about 75,000 to over 300,000 in just a few decades. People flooded in from the countryside, drawn by the promise of factory jobs. The city couldn't build housing fast enough. What they did build was often shoddy, crowded, and dangerous. As you walk, the streets get more crowded. Women carrying babies on their hips, old men hobbling on coal-black legs, children as young as 5 heading to work in the mines or factories. Everyone has the same grey pallor, the same hollow-eyed exhaustion. "Did you hear about the Turner boy?" a woman asks your father as you pass. "Lost his arm in the loom yesterday. Company says it's his fault for reaching in while it was running." Your father just nods grimly. Everyone knows someone who's been mangled by machinery. There are no safety guards, no regulations. The machines run constantly, and if you're too slow or too tired, they'll take your fingers, your hand, your arm, and then you're useless, unable to work, destined for the workhouse or the street. The mill looms ahead, a 7-story brick monstrosity with hundreds of windows. Even from outside you can hear the thunder of the machines, feel it in your chest like a second heartbeat. "See you at dinner break," your father says, heading to the men's entrance while you go through the children's door. Inside, the noise hits you like a physical force. Hundreds of mechanical looms clacking and banging, the hiss of steam, the shouts of overseers. It's so loud that workers develop a special sign language to communicate. Many go partially deaf within years. But it's not just the noise that assaults you, it's the heat and humidity. The cotton threads break less often if the air is damp, so they keep the factories hot and steamy. In summer, temperatures can reach 100 degrees. Workers sometimes collapse from heat exhaustion. And the cotton fluff, it's everywhere, floating in the air like toxic snow, settling on your clothes, your skin, in your lungs. Byssinosis, brown lung disease, is what they'll eventually call it, this slow suffocation that turns so many textile workers into hollow-chested ghosts by their 30s. "You're 2 minutes late, boy," shouts Mr. Jenkins, the floor overseer. "That's a penny off your wages." A penny might not sound like much, but when you're making maybe 3 shillings a week, about $15 in today's money, every penny counts. Victorian factory discipline was brutal and unyielding. Some factories had a system of fines so extensive that workers might lose a quarter of their wages for infractions like talking, sitting down, or opening a window for fresh air. Your job is to crawl under the massive looms when threads break or the fabric tangles. It's dangerous work. The machines don't stop, and you're squeezing between moving parts that could crush you in an instant. But small bodies fit where adults can't go, and children are cheaper to employ. 10 hours. That's your workday since the 10 Hours Act of 1847. Before that, 12 or 14 hours was common, children as young as 5 working from dawn until after dark. The reformers who pushed through the 10-hour day were considered radical for suggesting that maybe, just maybe, children shouldn't work themselves to death before puberty. When dinner break finally comes, you sit on the floor with the other children, eating a piece of bread spread with dripping, congealed animal fat. If your family was doing well this week, there might be a chunk of cheese or an onion, a sip of water from a communal dipper. 20 minutes, then back to work. "Did you see the Queen is having another baby?" one of the older girls says between bites. "Must be nice being royal." The papers, cheap ones printed on rough paper with sensational headlines, made their way even to factory floors. Victoria's growing family, her dresses, her palaces, they were like fairy tales to people whose entire lives played out within a few grimy blocks. "My mum says the prince is trying to help us," another boy offers. "Says he's talking to Parliament about the sewage and stuff." Prince Albert was indeed one of the more progressive royal figures when it came to social reform. He was genuinely disturbed by the conditions in industrial cities and pushed for improvements in housing, sanitation, and education. But good intentions at the top translated slowly, if at all, to actual changes on the ground. By mid-afternoon, you're exhausted. Your back aches from crawling, your hands are raw from the rough cotton, your lungs burn, but the machines keep running indifferent to human suffering, and so must you. When the whistle finally blows at 6, you emerge into air that would be considered dangerously polluted by modern standards, but feels blessedly fresh compared to the cotton-choked factory. Your father meets you outside, his face grey with fatigue. "Fish and chips tonight," he says, managing a smile. "Your mother got a bit extra from the washing." This is what passes for luxury. Fried fish and potatoes wrapped in newspaper, greasy and salty, and filling in a way your usual dinner of watery soup and bread isn't. Working-class diets in industrial cities were generally poor, heavy on carbs, light on protein and fresh vegetables. Malnutrition was common, especially among children. Rickets, caused by vitamin D deficiency, was so prevalent that bowed legs were considered a normal part of growing up. As you walk home, you pass through different neighbourhoods, each with its own distinct level of misery. There's the Irish Quarter, where families fleeing the potato famine have crowded into cellars and abandoned buildings. The mortality rate there is twice as high as the rest of the city. Don't stare, your father warns as you pass a group of hollow-eyed children picking through a pile of garbage. That could be us if the work dries up. This wasn't hyperbole. The Victorian working class lived perpetually on the edge of catastrophe. One illness, one accident, one economic downturn, and a family could slide from precarious stability into outright destitution. Back home, your mother has already returned from her job as a washerwoman. Her hands are red and cracked from lye soap and hot water. She's hung laundry on lines crisscrossing your single room, creating a damp, steamy atmosphere that's both uncomfortable and practical. The only way to dry clothes in a space without adequate ventilation. They're saying cholera's back in the East End, she says quietly to your father. 3 families down already. Cholera. The word sends a chill down your spine. You've seen what it does. The violent diarrhea and vomiting, the way a healthy person can be dead within hours, the blue-tinged skin of the dying. In 1848, no one really understood how cholera spread. Some blamed miasma, bad air. Others thought it was a punishment from God for immorality. Only a few doctors were beginning to suspect it had something to do with contaminated water. The truth was horrifying. In most industrial cities, drinking water was drawn from the same rivers where sewage was dumped. In London, the Thames was both the main source of drinking water and the city's largest sewer. During cholera outbreaks, people were literally drinking each other's waste. We'll get some lime tomorrow, your father says. Sprinkle it around the door. Lime was thought to purify the air and prevent disease. It didn't work against cholera, which spread through water, but it might help with the constant problem of vermin, the rats, mice, bedbugs and lice that plagued working-class homes. Your little sister's cough sounds worse tonight. In the flickering light of the single candle, her face looks flushed. She's burning up, your mother says, laying a hand on the child's forehead. The worry in her voice is clear. Childhood diseases were killers in Victorian England. Scarlet fever, diphtheria, whooping cough, measles, they swept through crowded neighbourhoods like wildfire, leaving tiny coffins in their wake. Should we call the doctor, you ask? Your parents exchange glances. A doctor costs money you don't have. There's no national health service, no health insurance. Medical care is a luxury for the working poor. I'll make her some onion syrup, your mother says finally. Folk remedies were often the only medicine available. Some worked, most didn't, but they were better than nothing. As you settle onto your pallet for the night, your sister's ragged breathing fills the small room. You're bone-tired, but sleep comes fitfully in these conditions. The walls are thin enough that you can hear your neighbours arguing, a baby crying, someone coughing wetly in the room above. Bedbugs bite when the candle goes out, leaving itchy welts by morning. This was life for the majority of people in industrial Britain, not the sanitised romantic version that shows up in costume dramas. It was brutal, grinding poverty with little hope of escape. Child mortality in poor neighbourhoods hovered around 50%. Half of all children died before their 5th birthday. Adult life expectancy in Manchester was 17 years lower than in rural areas. Meanwhile, across the country, another kind of ecological disaster was unfolding, one that would finally force Parliament to confront the sanitation crisis. London in the summer of 1858 became the site of what historians would later call the Great Stink. Years of dumping raw sewage directly into the Thames had created a river that was more waste than water. When an unusually hot summer hit, the stench became so unbearable that Parliament had to suspend sessions. Members hung sheets soaked in chloride of lime over the windows in a futile attempt to mask the smell. My nose was assailed by the most disgusting stench I have ever had the misfortune to smell, wrote one MP. It was like 1,000 privies emptied at once. The great stink finally accomplished what decades of reports about cholera deaths among the poor could not. It convinced the government to invest in a modern sewage system. The stench had reached the noses of the powerful, and suddenly sanitation became a priority. Joseph Bazalgette, a brilliant engineer, designed a network of sewers that would transform London. Over 100 miles of brick tunnels and pipes were built, diverting sewage away from the Thames and toward treatment plants downstream. It was one of the largest civil engineering projects of the 19th century, employing thousands of workers and using enough bricks to circle the globe twice. When completed in 1865, Bazalgette's sewer system immediately reduced deaths from cholera and typhoid. It's estimated to have added 20 years to the average Londoner's life expectancy. Similar systems would eventually be built in other industrial cities, though many poor neighbourhoods had to wait decades for proper sanitation. The Great Stink illustrated a fundamental truth about Victorian society. Reform typically happened not out of compassion for the suffering of the poor, but when problems became so severe they affected the comfortable lives of the wealthy and powerful. Back in Manchester, your family's daily struggle continues. Your sister's cough improves slightly with your mother's remedies, but she remains thin and pale. Factory work has already stunted her growth, as it has yours. Adult workers who started in factories as children were often several inches shorter than their middle-class counterparts, their bodies permanently shaped by malnutrition and overwork. There's a school opened in the church, your mother mentions one evening. Free lessons on Sundays. Education, like healthcare, was not a right but a privilege in early Victorian England. There was no national system of schools until late in the century. Working-class children who received any education at all often attended Sunday schools, so named because Sunday was the only day they weren't working. What good is reading to a factory boy? Your father asks, not unkindly. The practical realities of survival often trumped aspirations for education or advancement. Yet despite this hard-scrabble existence, working-class communities were not just collections of misery. They developed rich cultures of mutual aid and solidarity. Neighbours who had almost nothing themselves would still take in orphaned children rather than see them sent to the dreaded workhouse. Families pooled resources during tough times. Communities organised funeral clubs so no one would suffer the ultimate Victorian shame, a pauper's burial. Music halls provided cheap entertainment. Street vendors sold everything from meat pies to second-hand clothes. Religious organisations offered not just spiritual comfort, but practical help. Soup kitchens, clothing distributions, basic medical care. "Did you hear they're putting in gas lamps on the main road?" your mother says as she darns a sock by candlelight. "Mrs. Higgins says they'll burn all night. Imagine that. Streets you can see in after dark." The technological marvels of the age were gradually filtering down to even poor neighbourhoods. Gas lighting, indoor plumbing, for some, mass-produced goods that made small luxuries more affordable. Progress was coming, albeit slowly and unevenly. One evening, something unusual happens. A well-dressed gentleman appears in your neighbourhood, knocking on doors and asking questions. He's accompanied by a local minister who seems to know everyone. "It's one of them government inspectors," your neighbour whispers, "writing a report on housing," they say. The 1840s saw the rise of the social investigator, middle and upper-class reformers who ventured into poor neighbourhoods to document living conditions. Their reports, shocking to comfortable readers, helped build momentum for reform. When they knock on your door, your parents are clearly uncomfortable with these higher-class visitors seeing your cramped, damp living quarters, but the inspector is respectful, asking about your work, your health, your wages. He takes notes in a small book, nodding gravely. 7 people in 1 room, he mutters. No ventilation, no sanitation. Exactly as Dr. Chadwick described. Edwin Chadwick's 1842 Report on the Sanitary Condition of the Labouring Population had been a landmark document explicitly connecting poor housing conditions to disease and high mortality. It helped spark the public health movement that would gradually improve living conditions in industrial cities. As the inspector leaves, he presses a coin into your sister's hand. For fruit, he says kindly, fresh fruit helps with chest ailments. Your sister stares at the sixpence in wonder. It's more money than she's ever held. Can we really buy fruit? She asks after the visitors leave. Tomorrow, your mother promises. We'll get an orange and share it. An orange, an exotic luxury, imported from Spain or Portugal, something most working class children might taste only at Christmas, if then. This small kindness, this tiny glimpse of something better carries your family through another grueling week of factory work and persistent poverty, and that's how progress often came in Victorian Britain. Not in grand sweeping changes, but in incremental improvements fought for by reformers, reluctantly granted by authorities, gradually improving the most desperate conditions while leaving the fundamental structure of society intact. Meanwhile, in London's West End, another vision of Victorian life was taking shape. One of department stores with plate glass windows displaying unimaginable luxuries of wide boulevards swept clean of refuse, of comfortable middle-class homes with servants and indoor plumbing. The Great Exhibition of 1851 would soon showcase Britain's industrial might to the world, presenting a sanitised, triumphant narrative of progress that conveniently erased the human cost of that prosperity. These parallel Victorian Englands, the grinding poverty of industrial workers and the prosperous comfort of the middle and upper classes, existed side by side, separate worlds occupying the same geography. Prince Albert himself recognised this contradiction, writing, "The wealth which the manufacturing districts have accumulated has been partially distributed very unequally and has called into existence an entirely new population, for which no place has been provided in the social system of the country." As you drift off to sleep that night, your sister's breathing sounds a little easier. Tomorrow will bring another day of factory work, another fight for survival, but perhaps, just perhaps, things might someday get better. The inspector's visit, the promised orange, the new gas lamps, tiny pinpricks of light in an otherwise dark existence. What you don't know, what you can't know, is that you're living through a pivotal moment in human history, the birth pangs of modern industrial society. The suffering of the Victorian working class would eventually lead to labour laws, public health measures, universal education, and the rudiments of a social safety net. But that future remains distant, uncertain, visible only in the faintest glimmers of reform. For now, you pull your thin blanket closer against the night chill and dream of oranges. Have you ever felt like you were looking through a window into another world? That's exactly what it was like in Hyde Park, London, on May 1st, 1851. Imagine yourself standing among 25,000 people crammed into a building made entirely of glass. The sunlight streams through 300,000 panes, creating rainbows that dance across the polished floors. Above you soars a barrel-vaulted roof tall enough to enclose fully grown elm trees. This is the Crystal Palace, centerpiece of the Great Exhibition, the most ambitious showcase of human achievement the world has ever seen. It's like a cathedral built for industry instead of God, murmurs a well-dressed woman next to you, clutching her husband's arm, and she's not wrong. The Crystal Palace was, frankly, bonkers. Picture a massive greenhouse big enough to hold a small town, 1,851 feet long, deliberately matching the year, and 454 feet wide. Inside were 100,000 exhibits from around the world: steam engines, printing presses, sculptures, furniture, textiles, and the largest diamond in the world, the Koh-i-Noor from India. "Look at that," a father tells his wide-eyed son, pointing at a massive hydraulic press. "That's the future, my boy." Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, was the driving force behind this spectacle. The exhibition was his baby, a showcase for British innovation and a celebration of the industrial progress transforming the world. Victoria herself visited almost daily during its 6-month run, bringing her children to gape at the wonders on display. "The Queen's here today," whispers a guard to his colleague as you pass. Third time this week, Prince says she's fascinated by the Indian textiles. But here's what makes the Great Exhibition so fascinating as a window into Victorian society. For a brief moment, it brought together people from every class in a shared experience of wonder. The price of admission was deliberately set on a sliding scale, from a shilling on cheap days, affordable to skilled workers, up to 5 shillings on regular days for middle-class visitors, and much higher for the opening ceremonies and special events. 6 million people, equivalent to a third of Britain's population, visited during its run. Factory workers saved for weeks to afford the cheap tickets and train fare to London. The wealthy arrived in carriages, the middle classes by omnibus, the poor on foot. "They've got a proper water closet here," says a workingman, gesturing to his wife with excitement. "Flushes away the waste with water. Imagine that in our neighbourhood." For many visitors, the plumbing was as impressive as the industrial marvels. The Crystal Palace featured public toilets, a novelty for most, with actual flushing mechanisms. Over 827,000 visitors used them during the exhibition. Yes, they kept count. But as you wander from the exhibition back into London's streets, the illusion of a unified society quickly shatters. Step just a few blocks from Hyde Park and you'll find yourself in neighbourhoods where people live in conditions barely better than animals. London in 1851 was essentially 2 separate cities occupying the same space. The London of Buckingham Palace, gentlemen's clubs, department stores and gaslit theatres existed alongside a shadow city of slums, workhouses and grinding poverty. "Mind yourself," warns a constable as you turn down a narrow alley. "This isn't a place for decent folk after dark." The alley opens into a courtyard surrounded by crumbling tenements. Children with dirty faces play in the mud. A woman empties a chamber pot from an upper window, barely missing the passers-by below. The stench of rotting food, human waste, and unwashed bodies is overwhelming. This is St Giles, one of London's most notorious slums, known to locals as the Rookery. Similar neighbourhoods, Jacob's Island, Seven Dials, Saffron Hill, dotted the city like islands of misery amid growing prosperity. Charles Dickens, who knew these streets well, described Jacob's Island as the filthiest, the strangest, the most extraordinary of the many localities that are hidden in London. His novels didn't exaggerate the conditions. If anything, they sanitized them for his middle-class readers. The class divide in Victorian Britain wasn't just about money, it was a complete separation of realities. Different classes lived in different neighbourhoods, ate different foods, wore different clothes, even spoke differently. Most importantly, they faced wildly different odds of basic survival. Let me show you what I mean. It's morning in Mayfair, one of London's wealthiest neighbourhoods. In a grand townhouse, the Earl of Harrington's day begins around 9 a.m. A valet draws his curtains, helps him dress, and presents a breakfast of coffee, toast, eggs, kidneys, bacon, and fish, all served on fine china. The Earl's clothes for a typical day would include a tailored shirt with detachable collar, a waistcoat, a cravat or necktie, a frock coat, pressed trousers, polished boots, and a top hat if he's going out. The outfit represents the yearly income of a skilled worker. Meanwhile, in a one-room dwelling in Seven Dials, Jacob Miller, a dock worker, has already been up for hours. He left for work at 5 a.m. after a breakfast of bread and dripping, congealed fat, washed down with tea so weak you could read a newspaper through it. His wife and 5 children share the single room, which costs half their weekly income in rent. Jacob owns one set of clothes, patched repeatedly. When they're washed, rarely, water must be carried from a communal pump. He has to stay in bed until they dry. His boots have cardboard stuffed in the soles to cover the holes. The gentleman who draws the water cart says there's cholera on Bell Street. Jacob's wife tells a neighbour as they queue at the pump, 3 dead since Tuesday. Disease was perhaps the great equalizer. It affected all classes, but its impact varied dramatically depending on your social position. When cholera struck, the wealthy fled to country estates. The middle classes closed their windows and disinfected their homes with carbolic acid. The poor, crowded into filthy neighbourhoods with no sanitation, died in droves. "My sister lost 3 in a week," the neighbour replies, filling her bucket from the communal pump, the same pump that might be contaminated with sewage from nearby cesspits. They buried them in the same box to save on the funeral. A pauper's funeral was the ultimate Victorian shame. Unable to afford a proper burial, the poorest had their dead taken by the parish for interment in mass graves, sometimes dozens of bodies piled in a single pit. The horror of this fate led even the most destitute families to prioritise burial insurance. Weekly payments to funeral clubs that would ensure a dignified funeral with a coffin, hearse and individual grave. "We pay 2pence a week for each of us," Jacob's wife explains. "Better to go hungry now than be thrown in a pauper's hole at the end." The Victorian obsession with respectability created peculiar priorities. Families that could barely afford food would spend precious pennies on boot polish, clean collars and funeral insurance, the visible markers of being decent folk rather than the truly destitute. For those who fell to the bottom rung of society, one institution loomed like a nightmare: the workhouse. The Victorian workhouse wasn't just a shelter for the homeless or unemployed. It was a deliberately punitive institution designed to make poverty so unpleasant that only the truly desperate would seek help. The 1834 Poor Law Amendment Act, known to critics as the New Poor Law, established that anyone receiving public assistance had to enter a workhouse. "My John would rather die in the street than go to that place," an elderly woman says, her gnarled hands trembling. "They separate man and wife, 30 years married, and they'd put us in different buildings like criminals." She's not exaggerating. Workhouses were designed to break family bonds. Husbands and wives were housed separately and might go months without seeing each other. Children over 7 were taken from their mothers. Inmates wore uniforms, followed strict schedules, ate bland food in silent dining halls and performed tedious, often pointless labour, breaking stones, picking oakum, unravelling old ropes into fibres, or turning cranks that produced nothing. "My grandson was in the Lambeth workhouse," the old woman continues, "said the gruel was so thin you could see the bottom of the bowl through it, and never enough. Growing boy needs more than that." Oliver Twist's famous request, "Please sir, I want some more," resonated with Victorian readers precisely because they knew such a simple plea would be treated as outrageous insolence in the real workhouses of the time. The workhouse cast such a long shadow of fear that many families would go to extraordinary lengths to avoid it, including slow starvation, dangerous work, prostitution, or crime. "Better the devil you know than the workhouse devil," as a common saying went. Across town, in a comfortable villa in the new suburb of Bayswater, the Davis family represents another reality entirely: the rising Victorian middle class. Mr. Davis is a bank clerk earning $300 a year, about $45,000 in today's money. They employ 3 servants, a cook, a housemaid, and a nursemaid for their 4 children. Mrs. Davis has never cleaned a floor, washed clothes, or cooked a meal in her married life. Her days revolve around managing the household, making social calls, and raising her children. The family eats 3 substantial meals daily, with meat at both lunch and dinner. "I've ordered a new dress for Lady Simmons' garden party," Mrs. Davis tells her husband over breakfast. "The blue silk was simply too old-fashioned. Mrs. Phillips had almost the same style at church last Sunday." For middle-class Victorian women, appearances were everything. Their homes, clothes, manners, and children were all reflections of their social standing. Maintaining this facade often required ruthless economizing behind the scenes, cutting corners on servants' food to afford better cuts of meat for the family table, or darning sheets in private while presenting an immaculate front parlour to visitors. The Victorian middle class was obsessed with moral respectability, especially as many were just a generation removed from working class origins. They embraced rigid codes of behaviour, religious observance, and social etiquette as ways to distance themselves from their roots. "The Browns have let their daughter walk out with that young shopkeeper," Mrs. Davis says disapprovingly. "I always said they were a bit common." Social climbing was an art form with elaborate rules about who could associate with whom. Trade was looked down upon by professionals, who were in turn considered inferior to the gentry. Subtle distinctions in accent, vocabulary, and manners instantly identified someone's precise place in the social hierarchy. Meanwhile, back in the Davis household, 15-year-old Mary, the housemaid, has been working since dawn. She's cleaned grates, lit fires, carried hot water to bedrooms, emptied chamber pots, swept floors, and dusted furniture, all before the family came down to breakfast. "Girl, the brass on the front door isn't properly polished," Mrs. Davis scolds. "See to it immediately." Mary curtsies and hurries away. She works 16 hours a day, with half a day off on Sundays and every other Thursday afternoon. Her annual wage of $12, about $1,800 today, seems a fortune compared to factory work, though most goes home to her struggling family. Domestic service was the largest employer of women in Victorian Britain. By 1900, 40% of all female workers were servants. For many working-class girls, it offered a path to literacy, regular meals, and decent housing, though at the cost of near-total loss of personal freedom and often exposure to exploitation or abuse. "The master's son tried to corner me in the pantry again," Mary confides to the cook when they're alone. "I told him I'd scream so loud his mother would hear." Sexual harassment and assault of female servants was so common it was a standard plot point in Victorian literature. With few legal protections and the constant threat of dismissal without a character reference, many young women had little recourse against predatory employers or their sons. Let me take you to one more home before we leave this tour of Victorian class life. In rural Hampshire, about 50 miles from London, the Reverend George Sutton lives with his family in a small but comfortable vicarage. As a country parson with a modest private income, he occupies a curious middle ground, educated and genteel, but far from wealthy. The roof needs repairs again, he tells his wife over tea in the garden. I shall have to speak to the bishop about additional funds. Rural life moved at a different pace than the frenetic industrial cities. Here, the seasonal rhythms of planting and harvest still dictated much of life, though even agricultural work was being transformed by new machinery. Steam-powered threshers were replacing flail threshing by hand. Horse-drawn reapers were cutting wheat more efficiently than teams with scythes. The Johnsons have had to let go 3 of their farm labourers, Mrs. Sutton replies. That new reaping machine does the work of 10 men, George. Agricultural workers were among the most vulnerable in Victorian society. Poorly paid, subject to the whims of weather and harvest, they faced the constant threat of mechanisation eliminating their livelihoods. Many eventually joined the exodus to industrial cities, swapping rural poverty for urban slums in hope of steadier wages. The vicar's position gave him a unique view of his parish's social divisions. He dined occasionally with the local gentry at the manor house, counselled middle-class shopkeepers and farmers, and ministered to the poorest agricultural labourers in their cottages. I visited the Wilkins family today, he tells his wife. The youngest has the fever. I've left them what I could, but they need proper medical attention. For rural poor, medical care was often limited to folk remedies, the occasional visit from an overworked doctor, or the vicar's charity. Hospitals existed primarily in cities, and many charged fees beyond the reach of working people. Friendly societies and burial clubs sometimes provided rudimentary health care, but comprehensive medical treatment remained a luxury for most Victorians. Back in London, as evening falls, the 3 worlds we've glimpsed continue their parallel existences. The Earl dines on 7 courses served by liveried footmen before attending the opera. The middle-class Davis family enjoys a modest roast dinner before reading improving literature in their gas-lit parlour. Jacob the dock worker returns to his crowded room, too exhausted to do more than eat a bowl of soup before collapsing into sleep. What unified these disparate experiences? What thread connected the Victorian Earl to the workhouse inmate? One answer might be found in the institutions that were increasingly shaping Victorian lives: schools, hospitals, prisons, asylums, workhouses. The Victorian era saw the rise of bureaucracy and record-keeping, with official forms documenting births, marriages, deaths, crimes, illnesses and poverty. For the first time, the state was actively categorising and managing its citizens, regardless of class. Another common thread was the unprecedented pace of change. Whether riding in a first-class railway carriage or working on the railway lines, Victorians of all classes were experiencing a world transforming more rapidly than ever before in human history. Technologies that seemed miraculous in 1850 would be commonplace by 1870. Cities doubled in size within decades. Old certainties crumbled while new possibilities emerged. This relentless change created both opportunity and anxiety. The Victorian era saw explosive growth in the middle class as new professions and commercial ventures created paths to prosperity unknown to previous generations. But it also produced new forms of vulnerability, as traditional safety nets of extended family and stable communities frayed in the face of urbanisation and industrialisation. The class system itself was simultaneously becoming more rigid in its social boundaries, while more permeable in terms of mobility. Nouveau riche industrialists might buy country estates but find themselves snubbed by old money neighbours. Educated professionals claimed higher status than wealthy merchants. The expanding empire created opportunities for adventurous souls to reinvent themselves far from home. My cousin went out to India 5 years ago as nothing but a clerk, the vicar's wife mentions. Now he writes that he has a grand house and 10 servants. Could you imagine such a thing happening here? The British Empire opened escape hatches from the strict British class system. A man of modest background could go to India, Africa, or Australia and return wealthy or powerful in ways that would have been impossible had he remained in Britain. Of course, this opportunity came at the enormous cost of colonialism, exploitation, and violence against indigenous peoples, a dark underbelly of Victorian prosperity rarely acknowledged in polite society. As night falls completely over London, gas lamps create pools of light along fashionable streets, while in the slums, darkness reigns except for the occasional candle or oil lamp in a window. The Crystal Palace, that monument to progress and industry, stands silent in Hyde Park, its glass walls reflecting moonlight. For a moment, in that gleaming palace, Victorians had glimpsed a possible future, one of technological marvels, international cooperation, and shared wonder that transcended class. The reality of daily life remained far more divided, but something had shifted. The exhibition had shown what was possible when human ingenuity was unleashed. Prince Albert, whose vision had made the exhibition possible, continued to advocate for reforms that might bridge the chasm between Victorian Britain's parallel worlds, promoting education, public health, and housing improvements. Queen Victoria, initially focused primarily on her growing family and royal duties, was increasingly aware of the conditions her subjects faced, though her responses were often limited by her conservative views and the constitutional constraints on her power. And as you drift off to sleep tonight, comfortable in your warm bed with clean water at hand and medical care a phone call away, consider how many of these basic comforts were luxuries beyond reach for most people in the Victorian era, an era not so distant from our own, where the foundations of our modern world were being painfully, imperfectly laid. The cough started in November, just a tickle in the throat at first, nothing serious. By December 11th, 1861, Prince Albert couldn't get out of bed. The royal physicians hovered anxiously, their whispered consultations growing more urgent. Queen Victoria barely left his side, her face drawn with worry. "It's just a fever," she insisted to her eldest daughter. "Your father has always been strong." But this wasn't just any fever. Modern doctors believe it was likely typhoid, a bacterial infection spread through contaminated food or water. In an age before antibiotics, typhoid was often a death sentence. On December 14th, Albert's breathing became laboured. Victoria held his hand as the life slowly drained from the man who had been her partner, advisor, and the great love of her life for 21 years. The clock struck 11:15, Victoria later wrote in her journal. "I asked if he had kissed me. They said yes, but I did not feel it. I went out of the room a moment to go to the dressing room, and I thought I heard a strange, indistinct sound. I returned, and Albert was lying on his back quite still. Prince Albert was dead. He was just 42 years old." The world didn't end that night, but for Victoria, it might as well have. "My life as a happy one is ended," she wrote to her uncle Leopold. "The world is gone for me." Wait, let me set the scene properly. Picture Windsor Castle on that December night. Outside, frost coats the ancient stones. Inside, gas lamps cast flickering shadows on walls hung with rich tapestries. The Prince Consort's bedroom is oppressively hot. Victorian doctors believed fresh air was dangerous for the sick, so the windows are sealed tight despite his fever. The air smells of camphor, beef broth, unsuccessfully offered to the dying man, and the sickly sweet odour of approaching death. Royal attendants move silently across thick carpets, bringing ice to cool the prince's forehead, clean linens, and the various potions prescribed by the physicians, useless concoctions of brandy, quinine, and ammonia that could do nothing against the bacterial invader ravaging Albert's body. Victoria's 5 daughters wait in adjoining rooms, crying softly. Her eldest son, Bertie, the future Edward VII, is kept away, partly because his recent scandalous behaviour at army camp is believed to have contributed to his father's decline by causing him stress. Papa is with angels now, Princess Alice tells her younger siblings after Albert draws his last breath. This moment, Albert's death in 1861, marks a profound turning point not just in Victoria's life, but in the character of the Victorian age itself. The vibrant young queen who had once danced until dawn would now transform into the perpetually mourning widow of Windsor. For the remaining 40 years of her reign, Victoria would wear only black, withdraw from public duties, and build a cult of remembrance around her beloved husband. And in doing so, she would both reflect and intensify one of the most distinctive aspects of Victorian culture, its elaborate relationship with death. The Victorians were obsessed with death, like seriously obsessed, not in a morbid goth teenager way, but as a central ritualised part of everyday life. Death in Victorian England wasn't hidden away in hospitals and nursing homes. It happened at home, in the front parlour, with the whole family gathered around the bed. My grandmother kept grandfather in the front room for a week after he passed, a lady tells her friend as they shop for mourning clothes. Had the photographer come to take his portrait before they closed the coffin? Yes, you heard that right. Post-mortem photography was a common Victorian practice. Families who might never have been able to afford a portrait in life would scrape together money to have a final image of their loved ones after death. Sometimes the deceased would be posed as if sleeping. Sometimes they'd be arranged in family groups, propped up among the living. Children who died young might be posed with favourite toys. To modernise, these images are deeply unsettling. To Victorians, they were precious keepsakes, sometimes the only visual record of a beloved family member. How long will you wear full mourning? The friend asks as they examine black-bordered handkerchiefs. A year and a day for a husband, comes the reply. Then I can move to second mourning. Some grey or lavender after 18 months, perhaps. Victorian mourning customs were elaborate, strict, and socially enforced, especially for women. After a husband's death, a widow was expected to wear full mourning for at least 2 years, entirely black clothing of dull, non-reflective materials like crepe, no jewellery except jet, a black fossilised wood, and a heavy black veil when in public. This wasn't just fashion, it was a social requirement. A widow who appeared in public too soon after bereavement or in insufficiently sombre attire would face harsh judgment. For poorer women, maintaining an appropriate mourning wardrobe was yet another financial burden, forcing many to dye existing clothes black or go into debt for new ones. Victoria took these customs to an extreme. She remained in full mourning not for the expected 2 years, but for the rest of her life. 40 years of unrelieved black. Her obsession with Albert's memory bordered on the pathological. She kept his rooms exactly as they had been when he died, with hot water brought daily for shaving and his clothes laid out each morning. "The Queen has ordered that the Prince's side of the bed remain turned down," whispers a Windsor Castle maid to a new footman. "No one is allowed to touch his brushes or move his pocket watch." Victoria's retreat from public life after Albert's death caused a serious crisis for the monarchy. For years, she refused to open Parliament, attend public functions, or make appearances, while she continued to work diligently behind the scenes, reading state papers, corresponding with ministers, maintaining her detailed journal. Her subjects began to question the value of an invisible queen. "What does she do to earn her money?" demanded one newspaper editorial in 1864. Republican sentiment began to grow, with calls for abolishing the monarchy altogether. "Mrs. Brown says the Queen is coming to Balmoral next month," a shopkeeper in the Scottish village tells his wife. Another summer, hiding away in the Highlands instead of showing herself to her people. Ah yes, John Brown. We should talk about him because he's key to understanding Victoria's middle years. Brown was a Scottish servant from the Balmoral estate who became Victoria's close companion after Albert's death. Rough-mannered, forthright and utterly devoted to the Queen, he provided the emotional support and practical assistance Victoria desperately needed. Rumours spread that they were lovers, or even secretly married, leading to Victoria being nicknamed Mrs. Brown by critics. While historians generally believe the relationship remained non-romantic, it clearly provided Victoria with comfort during her darkest years. When Brown died in 1883, Victoria was devastated all over again. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's zoom out from Windsor Castle and Victoria's personal grief to see how the Victorian relationship with death shaped society more broadly. Death in Victorian England was ever present in a way that's difficult for us to imagine today. The average life expectancy for a labourer in Liverpool was just 15 years. In London, it was 26 for working class men. Even the wealthy weren't spared. Infectious diseases like typhoid, cholera and tuberculosis could strike anyone. Children were especially vulnerable. Infant mortality ran as high as 50% in poor areas. Victorian literature is filled with deathbed scenes of angelic children because these were common experiences that resonated with readers who had lost their own little ones. "The Thompson baby was buried yesterday," a woman tells her neighbour as they hang laundry in a London courtyard. "That's 3 she's lost before their first birthday. The little angels are watching over her from heaven, I suppose." This familiarity with death created a culture where mortality was acknowledged and prepared for rather than denied. Victorians invested heavily in the good death, a peaceful passing at home, surrounded by family, with time for proper farewells and spiritual preparation. The funeral industry boomed as never before. Elaborate funeral processions became status symbols, with horse-drawn hearses sporting black ostrich plumes, professional mourners hired to walk behind the coffin, and specially designed mourning jewellery containing locks of the deceased's hair. For the wealthy, funerals could be extraordinarily lavish affairs. When the Duke of Wellington died in 1852, his funeral procession included a purpose-built funeral car that weighed 18 tons, drawn by 12 black horses. Over 1 million people lined the streets to watch. At the other end of the social scale, the poor scraped together pennies for burial insurance, terrified of the Victorian fashion was so extreme that women's corsets could reduce their waist size by up to 10 inches. The average woman's natural waist was 27 to 29 inches, but society celebrated the ideal 18-inch waist, all while doctors raised concerns about breathing difficulties and circulation problems. If you enjoy these stories, hit subscribe. Also, drop your location in the comments. I'm always curious where everyone's listening from. We're heading to Victorian England in a minute. First though, get comfortable. Seriously, take a second, adjust whatever needs adjusting. You're not going to want to move once we start. The pressure around your ribs is the first thing you notice. Even before opening your eyes, you can feel it, like a giant hand squeezing your torso. Welcome to morning as a Victorian woman in 1870. You blink awake in a modest bedroom, lying on a horsehair mattress that crinkles when you shift. The room is cold, damn cold actually. The coal fire died hours ago and frost patterns decorate the inside of your window panes. Unlike your cosy blanket right now, the thin wool coverings barely trap any heat. Time to rise, ma'am. Your lady's maid, Agnes, has entered silently. She's already been up for hours, lighting fires, preparing your clothes, heating water. She looks exhausted, but that's not your concern right now. You have your own battle ahead. Is it really necessary today, you ask, eyeing the contraption Agnes is laying out on the dressing table. I'm only visiting Mother. Agnes gives you that look, the one that says, we have this conversation every morning. Your mother would be the first to notice if you weren't properly dressed, ma'am, she replies diplomatically. She's right, your mother would definitely notice and comment, and then tell everyone else she knows. The thought makes your stomach clench. The corset lies there like an instrument of torture, which honestly it basically is. Whalebone and steel designed to force your body into an impossible shape. Last week you heard about a woman whose corset was so tight that when she died they found her ribs had grown around it. Like a tree growing around a fence. Your body literally reshaping itself to accommodate this cage. Shall we begin? Agnes asks. First comes the chemise, a thin cotton undergarment that serves as a barrier between your skin and the corset. Then cotton drawers tied at the waist. Already you're warmer. Silver linings, I guess. Agnes holds the corset up against your torso. It's a well-made piece, custom fitted last year when you still had dreams of achieving an 18-inch waist. You're hovering around 20 inches now, which your husband has deemed acceptable. How generous of him. Deep breath, ma'am, Agnes warns. You inhale as much as possible, knowing that soon breathing deeply won't be an option. Agnes wraps the corset around your torso and begins the lacing process. The first few tugs are manageable, just a gentle pressure, but as Agnes works her way down, each pull becomes more restrictive. Your ribs compress, your lungs can't fully expand, your internal organs are literally shifting position. A bit tighter, ma'am. The blue dress needs a smaller waist. Just a bit more, you gasp. Agnes braces her foot against the bedpost for leverage, pulling the laces with all her strength. You grip the bedpost, knuckles white. Jesus, you mutter under your breath. How is this fashion? Language, ma'am, Agnes reminds you, but there's sympathy in her voice. She's not immune. She wears a corset too, though a cheaper, less restrictive version. The pressure required for your waist would prevent her from completing her physically demanding work. With a final tug, Agnes ties off the laces. You try to breathe and find you can only take shallow sips of air. Your lower ribs are compressed almost to meeting in the middle. There now. Beautiful, Agnes says, steering you toward the mirror. The transformation is undeniable. Your waist is impossibly small, creating that coveted hourglass figure. But at what cost? You already feel lightheaded, and you haven't even gone downstairs yet. Dr. Harrison's warning echoes in your mind. These contraptions are slowly killing you, ladies, he'd said during your last visit for female troubles. Your mother had been scandalized, insisting he was being dramatic. But when he showed you those medical drawings, the way organs get crushed and displaced, you couldn't unsee it. The women in your circle dismiss such warnings. Men have always tried to control what we wear, your friend Elizabeth had said last week. First they want us in corsets, then they claim to want us out of them for our health. Make up your minds, gentlemen. You had laughed along, but privately wondered if maybe the doctors had a point. Your monthly courses had become irregular and painful since tightening your corset to please your husband, and that fainting spell at the Hendersons' dinner party last month, definitely from lack of oxygen. Now, for the petticoats, Agnes announces, holding up what looks like enough fabric to sail a small ship. Layer by layer, Agnes builds your silhouette. First, the cotton petticoat, then 2 more made of heavier material. Already, you're carrying several pounds of fabric, all hanging from your compressed waist. Your lower back begins to ache in protest. I was reading about this American woman, you tell Agnes as she works. Amelia Bloomer. She wears trousers under a shorter skirt. Can you imagine? Agnes looks scandalised. Trousers on a lady. What would the neighbours say? That's exactly what my husband said, you sigh. But think how much easier it would be to move, to breathe, to exist. Easier isn't always proper, Mum, Agnes says diplomatically, though you can see a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. Next comes your bustle, a metal cage that attaches at your lower back, creating that fashionable posterior shelf that men supposedly find attractive. It adds another pound of weight and makes sitting a strategic challenge. You'll spend the day perching on the edges of chairs or standing until your feet throb. The blue dress goes on last, a beautiful creation of silk and lace with 57 tiny buttons down the back that poor Agnes must fasten one by one. By the time she's done, your back is ramrod straight, your waist is cinched to painful proportions, and your lungs can only expand by about half their capacity. There, Agnes says with satisfaction, you look like a proper lady. You study your reflection. Yes, you've achieved the ideal Victorian silhouette. Tiny waist, ample bosom, wide hips. The dress is beautiful, but already spots dance before your eyes from shallow breathing. Your ribs send shooting pains with every movement. And you know that by evening the flesh under your corset will be raw and chafed, possibly bleeding in spots. Is beauty worth this? Agnes brings your jewellery next, a cameo brooch from your husband, earrings from your father, and a delicate gold chain. These small personal touches are the only parts of your appearance truly under your control. Oh, I almost forgot, Agnes says, retrieving a small bottle from your dressing table. Your mother sent this over. She says all the ladies are using it for a youthful complexion. You examine the bottle. Dr. Campbell's Arsenic Complexion Wafers. Arsenic? You ask, alarmed. Isn't that poison? In large doses, ma'am, but these are perfectly safe in small amounts. The lady down the street has been taking them for months and her skin is like porcelain. You've heard the rumours, though. The woman 3 doors down who took similar wafers and ended up with tremors in her hands. The socialite who died suddenly after using arsenic powders for years. I think I'll pass for today, you say, setting the bottle aside. Agnes looks worried. Your mother will ask if you've tried them. Then let her ask. This small rebellion feels significant. You can't escape the corset. Not yet, anyway, but you can refuse to literally poison yourself for beauty. As Agnes styles your hair, you gaze out the window at the street below. A delivery boy races past on a bicycle, moving freely, breathing deeply. You feel a stab of envy so intense it takes you by surprise. Do you ever wonder what it would be like, you ask Agnes suddenly, to move through the world without all this? Agnes pauses, hairpin in hand. Sometimes, ma'am, when I see my brother run across a field or climb a tree, she lowers her voice. And sometimes at night, I loosen my corset when no one's looking, just to remember what it feels like to take a real breath. This confession creates an unexpected moment of solidarity between you, two women separated by class but united by the same physical restrictions. Maybe someday, you say, though you don't finish the thought. Agnes adds the final touches to your hair, a complex arrangement of curls and twists that you couldn't possibly reproduce on your own. Another way you're dependent on others just to present yourself acceptably to society. Ready to go downstairs, Mum? You nod, though ready isn't quite the word. You're armoured, packaged, presented, but definitely not comfortable or free. You stand carefully, feeling the weight of the fabrics, the squeeze of the corset, the pinch of two small shoes. The day stretches before you, a series of restrictive spaces, limited movements, shallow breaths, and careful social performances. And tomorrow you'll do it all again. As you make your way toward the door, you catch sight of a pamphlet on your writing desk, something your husband's progressive cousin had slipped to you at last week's dinner party. The Rational Dress Society, the headline reads. You'd hidden it quickly, but the ideas inside have been haunting you. Could women really dress differently? Could you someday walk through the world without feeling like your body is in a cage? Agnes follows your gaze and quickly adjusts your skirt, drawing your attention away from the forbidden literature. Best not to dwell on such things, Ma'am, she says quietly. Some battles can't be won in a day. You take as deep a breath as your corset allows and prepare to descend the stairs. One careful step at a time, as befits a proper Victorian lady. The weight of expectations feels heavier than all your clothing combined. Breakfast is a painful affair, not the food itself. Cook has prepared a lovely spread of toast, eggs and kippers, but the actual process of eating while corseted is miserable. Your compressed stomach can only handle small bites, and even those sit uncomfortably. Your husband barely notices your discomfort. He's hidden behind his newspaper, occasionally making comments about politics or business that require no real response from you. This is probably a blessing. At least you don't have to make conversation while struggling to breathe. I'll be at the club until late, he announces, folding his paper. The Hendersons are coming for dinner tomorrow, so make sure you look presentable. The way his eyes flicker to your face makes his meaning clear. The Hendersons are influential, and Mrs. Henderson is known for her flawless complexion and fashionable appearance. You'll need to do better than just a corset tomorrow. After he leaves, you return to your dressing room where Agnes has laid out your beauty regimen. The array of bottles, pots and tools looks more like a chemist's laboratory than cosmetics. Shall we begin with the face treatments, Ma'am? Agnes asks. You nod, settling onto the stool before your vanity mirror. The woman who stares back at you is pale, not the fashionable porcelain pallor, but the sickly pallor of someone who rarely sees the sun. Dark circles rim your eyes from another night of uncomfortable sleep in your corset. Mrs. Henderson uses that new face cream, you muse. The one with... what is it called? Ammonia, ma'am, Agnes says, reaching for a white jar. Said to remove impurities from the skin. She unscrews the lid and the sharp, acrid smell makes your eyes water immediately. Inside is a white paste that supposedly bleaches the skin to the desired marble-like perfection. Are you sure this is safe? You ask, wrinkling your nose. Agnes hesitates. Lady Caroline swears by it, though her lady's maid told me in confidence that it burned her skin something awful the first week. And the alternative is... Agnes gestures to the array of other options, creams containing lead, mercury or arsenic, all guaranteed to create that coveted deathly pallor that signifies you've never had to work outside in the sun. You know, Agnes says quietly, my grandmother used to make a face cream from beeswax and rosewater. Didn't turn you white as a ghost, but it kept her skin nice into old age. You consider this. A natural option sounds appealing, but would it be enough? Society doesn't want nice skin. It wants unnaturally pale, artificially perfect skin, the kind that shows you can afford to poison yourself slowly in the name of beauty. Let's try the ammonia cream, you decide, mentally preparing for the burn, but not too much. Agnes nods and dips her fingers into the jar, then begins applying the cream to your face in light circular motions. The burning sensation is immediate, a chemical fire across your skin. Your eyes water and your nose runs, but you force yourself to remain still. "It's working, Mom," Agnes says encouragingly. "Your skin is already turning whiter." "Probably because all the blood is retreating in terror," you mutter, which makes Agnes stifle a laugh. Next comes the powder, a fine white dust that Agnes applies with a large puff. It contains bismuth, a heavy metal that gives that desired matte finish. You try not to think about how it's slowly absorbing into your skin day after day, year after year. "Now for your eyes, ma'am?" Agnes reaches for a small dropper bottle containing a clear liquid. "Is that the—" "Belladonna, yes ma'am, for brightening the eyes." You've used it before, drops made from deadly nightshade that dilate the pupils dramatically, creating a doe-eyed, luminous look that men find attractive. The side effects include blurred vision, sensitivity to light, and if used too frequently, blindness. But what's a little vision damage in the pursuit of beauty? "Just one drop in each eye," you instruct, tilting your head back. Agnes carefully administers the drops. The familiar burning sensation follows, then the strange feeling of your pupils expanding beyond their natural size, letting in too much light. The world becomes slightly fuzzy around the edges. "Beautiful," Agnes murmurs, "like starlit pools." You blink rapidly, trying to clear your vision. This temporary beauty will make reading impossible for at least 3 hours, and you'll need to avoid bright windows. A small price to pay, you're told. "Remember what happened to Lady Pembroke?" you ask Agnes as she prepares the rouge pot. "They say she went completely blind from belladonna drops." "I heard it was her own fault," Agnes replies, repeating the gossip of the servants' quarters, using them 3 times a day instead of once. You wonder what drove Lady Pembroke to such extremes. Was her husband particularly demanding? Did she feel the constant pressure to be more beautiful, more perfect, more doll-like for the male gaze? Or was she simply caught in the same beauty trap as all of you? Competing in an endless game where the rules were written by men and the players were all women. "Now for your lips, ma'am." Agnes takes a small brush and dips it into a pot of red salve. This at least is relatively harmless, just beeswax tinted with carmine from crushed beetles. The irony isn't lost on you. The one beauty product that won't slowly poison you is made from insects. "Agnes," you say suddenly as she applies the tint to your lips. "Do you think our daughters will still be doing all this 20, 30 years from now?" Agnes pauses, brush in hand. "Hard to say, ma'am. My mother wore a corset even tighter than yours. Said in her day they'd lace until someone fainted, then loosen it just enough to wake them up." "That's horrible." "That was fashion," Agnes shrugs. "Though I did hear about some ladies starting a society against it all. The Rational something or other." "Rational Dress Society," you supply, thinking of the pamphlet hidden in your desk drawer. Agnes nods. "My cousin works for a lady who's joined it. Says they want women in shorter skirts and looser bodices. Some even wear trousers underneath like men. The idea is both scandalous and thrilling. To move freely, to breathe fully, to exist in your body rather than being packaged in it. What do you think would happen, you ask, genuinely curious, if I just didn't wear a corset one day? Agnes looks genuinely alarmed. "Oh, ma'am, you couldn't. Your husband would notice straight away. And if you went out, why, everyone would talk. But what if all women decided at once they couldn't ostracise all of us? I suppose not, Ma'am, but who'd be the first? That's the problem, isn't it? Someone has to go first. Someone has to brave the ridicule, the social suicide of defying convention. And despite your private rebellious thoughts, you know it won't be you. Not today, anyway. Now for your hair, Ma'am, Agnes says, changing the subject. She picks up the curling tongs that have been heating by the fire. They're red hot, designed to create the tight ringlets currently in fashion. Your scalp still bears small scars from previous burns, an occupational hazard of Victorian hairstyling. Agnes is skilled, but accidents happen, especially when working with tools literally designed to burn. Have you heard about that new permanent waving machine? Agnes asks as she carefully wraps a strand of your hair around the hot metal. They say it can curl your hair for weeks, not just days. The Nestler machine? I read about it. Didn't the inventor burn his wife's hair off twice while perfecting it? That's what I heard, Agnes confirms with a slight smile. Must have been quite devoted to him to let him try a third time. You share a laugh at this, a rare moment of feminine solidarity across class lines. Both of you understand the painful absurdity of what women endure. The smell of singed hair fills the room as Agnes continues her work. It's not burning, just cooking slightly. Another unpleasant aspect of beauty that everyone pretends not to notice. Your friend Elizabeth visited Paris last season and returned with tales of women who coloured their hair with dyes containing lead, mercury and silver nitrate. Some had developed strange symptoms, trembling hands, headaches, even partial paralysis, but their hair was fashionably coloured, so many considered it a reasonable trade. Did you see Mrs. Whitmore at the Johnsons' dinner? Agnes asks as she works. Her new lady's maid used to work for an actress. Did her hair with something special. It did look unusually red, you recall. Very striking. Apparently it's henna mixed with something else. Can't recall the name, but her maid said it's turning Mrs. Whitmore's hair brittle as straw. Coming out in handfuls it is. You wince, not just from the hot curling tongs near your ear. Is there anything we do that doesn't eventually harm us? Agnes considers this seriously. Sleep, perhaps, though my mother always slept in papillotes to curl her hair and woke with awful headaches from the tight wrapping. With your hair finally arranged in an elaborate style that will require you to sleep sitting up to preserve it. Agnes steps back to admire her work. Perfect, ma'am. Now for the finishing touch. From a velvet-lined box, she removes your pearl earrings, heavy pendants that will drag at your earlobes all day, eventually stretching the holes until they tear, as happened to your grandmother. Beauty is pain, after all. I don't think I need the earrings today, you decide. Just visiting mother, after all. Agnes looks surprised but pleased. These small rebellions feel significant, even if they're tiny in the grand scheme of things. As Agnes helps you rise, you catch sight of yourself in the full-length mirror. The transformation is complete. You've gone from a natural human woman to a Victorian ideal. Wasp-waisted, pale-skinned, bright-eyed, with elaborate curls and artificially reddened lips. You look beautiful by the standards of your time. You also look like you're slowly killing yourself, which, in a way, you are. The door opens and your lady's maid from the neighbouring estate enters, looking distraught. Begging your pardon, ma'am, but could Agnes come quick? It's Lady Russell. She's collapsed again. Agnes looks to you for permission, which you quickly grant. What happened? You ask the maid. Her corset, ma'am. Tightened it more than usual for the garden party. Couldn't breathe proper, and when she tried to sit for tea, she just folded. Doctor's been called, but the master is in a state. You exchange a look with Agnes. This happens more often than anyone acknowledges. Women fainting from oxygen deprivation, their compressed organs simply giving up. Usually they're loosened, revived and sent right back to the same practices that caused the problem. "Tell Lady Russell I'll call tomorrow," you tell the maid. "And Agnes, perhaps bring her that pamphlet from my desk." Agnes's eyes widen slightly, but she nods. A small act of rebellion passing forbidden literature, but maybe, just maybe, if enough women start questioning these practices. After Agnes leaves, you stand alone in your dressing room, surrounded by bottles of poisons disguised as beauty aids. Your skin tingles from the ammonia cream. Your eyes struggle to focus from the belladonna. Your ribs ache from the corset. Your scalp stings from the hot tongs. All of this suffering for beauty, all of this danger for social acceptance. You think of your mother enduring these same rituals for 30 years. You think of Lady Russell, unconscious from a too tight corset. You think of the pamphlet now making its way to another potential convert to rational dress. Change comes slowly, then all at once. Perhaps you're witnessing the slow part, the quiet questioning, the private rebellions, the whispered conversations between women about whether there might be another way to exist in the world. You take a final look in the mirror. Today, you'll play by society's rules. You'll visit your mother corseted, painted and proper, but you've refused the arsenic wafers. You've skipped the heavy earrings. You've passed along dangerous literature. Small acts of rebellion, but they have to start somewhere. With careful, measured steps, the only kind possible in your restrictive clothing, you make your way downstairs to begin your day, wondering if your daughter or granddaughter might someday walk freely, breathe deeply, and exist in her body as nature intended. It seems an impossible dream, but then again, all change begins as an impossible dream. The carriage ride to your mother's home is uncomfortable. Each bump in the road jars your compressed organs, sending small shocks of pain through your abdomen. You try to sit perfectly straight, as slouching in a corset creates its own special kind of torture, the rigid boning digging into your flesh like knives. Your mother's home appears around the corner, a respectable townhouse with lace curtains visible through gleaming windows, the perfect Victorian home designed to showcase the perfect Victorian wife who maintains it. Your mother greets you in the parlour, her own waist impossibly tiny for a woman in her 50s. You wonder how many decades her organs have been compressed, reshaped, rearranged within her body. Has she ever taken a full breath? You can't remember ever seeing it. "Darling," she says, kissing your cheek, "you look acceptable, though your complexion could use some help. Have you tried those arsenic wafers I sent over?" "Not yet, mother," you reply. "I've been feeling a bit unwell." She frowns. All the more reason to use them. Nothing enhances a woman's beauty like a touch of illness. Men adore the delicate look. She leans closer. Mrs. Carrington has been taking them for months and received 3 marriage proposals for her daughters already this season. You don't mention that Mrs. Carrington's youngest daughter confided in you that she's been coughing blood recently. Beauty has its price, and in Victorian England that price is often paid in health. "I've come for your advice, actually," you say,